Hey everybody, and welcome back to English 102. We're going to get started this week with a little exercise where you're going to do a little writing about a poem that I'm going to offer to you. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with, but please know that this is really a starting activity that basically will show me kind of what you know at this point about reading and analyzing poetry. And it's not really designed to test you or grade you in any kind of punitive way. I really just want to get a sense of where we're all starting out. And eventually you're going to share that writing with somebody else in this class, and I hope get some feedback and teach a little bit to one another about that poem. But I want to make sure that we're have a couple tools at least at our disposal when we go in and read the poem that I'm going to ask you to write about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those today very quickly. So first I'll start with some tools of analysis more generally. They're, in other words, when we go to poems, plays, or short stories, we can use these same tools. They're just some ways to think about analyzing literature. First up, it's kind of obvious, but may not be to some, is to pay attention. Pay attention to the details and try to get a sense of the big picture of the work. What's it trying to do? What's it trying to accomplish? And how does it go about doing that? So in order to do that, you're going to have to examine the parts, analyze each part of the work separately. Take a look at individual words and phrases that may be important. And then you have to ask yourself, how do those parts add up to a whole, right? And after you've done that, after you've kind of done all of that analysis, then you're going to be able to make a claim that will clarify or illuminate the piece to others. In other words, your goal in this whole thing is that you can help someone else better understand the work or understand it in a new way. Now, when we get to poetry, there's some specific tools we use to analyze poetry that may not apply to short stories and plays, or at least apply less adeptly to that. So I just want to tell you a few things about that. The first thing you need to know about poetry is that poems often emerge from a writer taking the momentary actions and connections of their mind and solidifying them on the page. It's often less of a puzzle than you think. If you don't get it, you're not necessarily wrong. Thoughts are strange, messy, odd, and when you look at a poem on the page, you're going to see imagery that is kind of emerges from a spark in a writer's brain. So oftentimes poets don't even get their own work, until long after writing it, if ever. So although we can make better or worse analyses of a poem, it's a challenge to come up to any final conclusions like this poem is about that. Typically a strong analysis is deeply ingrained in the words of the text without too many outside assumptions, right? So try to bring less of your own ideas and try to draw your ideas from the poem. That's one great thing to keep in mind when analyzing poetry. So a few poetry terms you want to keep in mind off the bat are just like those groups of lines in a poem that are separated are called stanzas. It's like the equivalent of a paragraph. So you want to think of like verbal things that you can see. You also want to think of audible things that you can hear, like alliteration. The alliteration is kind of the reverse of a rhyme. It's when sounds at the beginnings of words repeat. And then there's also the imagery, and we need words to describe imagery, such as metaphor, symbol, or illusion. So a metaphor is when you say, the sun was a flashlight. It's comparing one thing to another using figurative language. Symbolism is when you use something to stand in for something else. And an allusion is a reference to an outside work. So those are some things you want to think about when you're reading those. Particularly the poem we're going to be looking at this week deals with some allusions. Now there are many other poetry terms that I'm going to post another video that kind of walks you through a slideshow on. But you don't necessarily need those to complete your assignment for this week. But what you will need to know is that you need to make a claim. Now, a claim about the poem is, first of all, not a fact. It's a statement of opinion based on analysis. This is from a textbook. It says, A claim persuades, argues, convinces, proves, or provocatively suggests something to a reader who may or may not initially agree with you. So you want your claims to be supported by evidence, and you want to express a point of view about that work of literature. So your kind of job this week will be to help a reader who knows the work and is familiar with its basic facts, in other words, someone who's read it, to develop a new or greater appreciation for the work based on your analysis and your perceptions. Now, when you write an essay, it generally has one single main claim and perhaps several subclaims. In other words, there's several things you have to prove before you can make your main point clear and well justified. So claims typically center on a theme. That's another thing to think about. You know, what themes are involved in a poem? And you may analyze the way a text produces that effect or that theme. In other words, a way the text functions to express the theme. So those are the main things you need to know for this week. There's a lot more to it, but I'd like to leave you with that, and let's see what you come up with in your analysis of Terence Hayes' Carp poem. All right, see you soon.